About the crowds. Well, at this time in the show, we always show you something that's trending on social media. How about this? You couldn't get
about the buzz around the crowds. Now, at this point in the show, we always bring you something that's blowing up on social media. Check this out. You wouldn't believe the gap. One press conference pulled in close to 10 times the views of another. 9,000 views. That was the YouTube count for 2 pre-tournament press conferences at the 2026 Australian Open. The bigger number belonged to a 20-year-old Filipina who would go on to lose in the first round. The smaller number belonged to the world number 1. Her name is Alex Eala. And by the time this video ends, you'll understand exactly why the world number 1 walked into Wimbledon this week defending her own image, while the number 29 seed walked in carrying an entire nation on her back. If you've been in this corner since the Miami semifinal, since the Junior US Open, since before the seeding committee even knew how to spell her name, this channel was built for you. Subscribe and stand with the rest of the Filipino army that has been right about this story from day one. You already know the Mira story. You already know the rankings. So set all of that aside for a second. 5 days before Wimbledon kicked off, Eala lifted her first grass court trophy in Birmingham. 2 weeks before that, she beat world number 2 Elina Svitolina in Berlin and pushed all the way to the semifinals, a genuinely stunning run from Alex Eala. On Saturday, June 27th, she trained for 2 hours on the Aorongi grass and walked into Wimbledon as the first Filipino ever seeded at a Grand Slam. Now put that next to what was happening on the other side of the bracket. While Eala spent her week fielding questions about her supporters, Elina Svitolina spent hers answering for herself. On June 27th, The Guardian ran an interview with the world number 1 carrying a pointed headline. 3 days before that, Reuters had quoted Sabalenka admitting she'd slipped into what she described as a deep, dark hole following her Roland Garros quarterfinal collapse, a loss after which she told reporters, in her own words, that she just wanted to quit tennis right then, but would wait and see, hoping to get back on track in a few days. British media labeled her pre-Wimbledon press conference a grilling. Sabalenka has said nothing publicly about Eala or her Filipino following. And in this story, that silence is the loudest sound in the building, because while the world number 1 was being pressed to defend her personality, the number 29 seed was being asked which Tagalog phrase she wanted engraved on her trophy. Start with the number the BBC put on record back in January. Eala's Australian Open press conference pulled 71,000 views on YouTube. Carlos Alcaraz, 29,000. Coco Gauff, 29,000. Elina Svitolina, 9,000. The most watched WTA player at the season's opening slam wasn't the world number 1. It was an unseeded Filipina who hadn't even won a match in Melbourne yet. Then came the cues. The BBC's tennis reporter in Melbourne described thousands of Filipino fans creating a bottleneck outside Court 6, a 1,500 capacity outer court, with a line stretching several hundred yards across the grounds. And Kia Thavang, on BBC Radio 5 Live, said it plainly. She couldn't believe the cues and wondered who on earth was running the scheduling. The Australian Open's official response on X was essentially an institutional surrender. They called it a learning. A Grand Slam tournament had just publicly admitted it badly underestimated one 20-year-old's drawing power. By March, the All England club had clearly gotten the message. Eala arrived at Wimbledon 2026 as the 29th seed, the first Filipino in the 147-year history of Grand Slam tennis to be seeded at a major. This isn't just a personal milestone. This is a structural shift from the most traditional institution in the sport. Then came Birmingham. June 22nd, 2026, the Lexus Birmingham Open Final. Eala beats Nicole Bardunkova in 3 sets to claim her first WTA grass court title. She steps up to the mic for the trophy ceremony. She doesn't thank her academy first. She doesn't thank her coach first. She turns to the crowd and says in Tagalog, "Home is the people, not the place." Thank you to her countrymen for the support. Home is the people, not the place. That's the line the entire Filipino army had been waiting for someone at this level to say into a championship microphone. That's the moment a fanbase stopped being a footnote in someone else's story and became the story itself. If you've spent 2 years telling your friends this one was different, that this wasn't hype, this was history, Birmingham was the proof. You weren't early. You were right. 2 weeks earlier in Berlin, she'd already erased any doubt about the tennis itself. She beat world number 2 Elina Svitolina in the round of 16, then beat her again in the quarterfinal. She lost the semi-final to Linda Noskova 6-2, 6-4 in just 69 minutes. By then, the crowds weren't cheering for potential anymore. They were cheering for a genuine contender who just knocked a top 2 player clean out of a tournament. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world number 1 was unraveling in public. The Roland Garros quote, "The deep dark hole. The guardian piece." 2 players heading into the same fortnight, one defending her image, one carrying a country. When you need a real verdict on whether something has shifted in this sport, you don't ask a fan, you ask and Kia Thaving, former British number 1, current captain of Great Britain's Billie Jean King Cup team, and a longtime BBC tennis analyst who's watched 2 decades of Grand Slam crowds come and go. When Kia Thaving looked at what was unfolding outside Court 6 in Melbourne, she didn't reach for diplomatic phrasing. She reached for disbelief and called out the scheduling team live on national radio in the middle of a Grand Slam. That's not a throwaway comment. That's a respected former player on record saying the tour hasn't yet built the infrastructure to handle the audience Alex Eala brings with her. And she's not alone. Greg Rosetsky, U.S. Open finalist, former world number 4, Wimbledon mainstay, has suggested this fortnight could be Eala's breakthrough slam and specifically pointed to her Filipino support as part of the reason. When 2 former top 10 era voices arrive at the same conclusion independently, it stops being an opinion. The Wimbledon draw may have just handed Eala the biggest favor of her career. Sabalenka sits in quarter 1. Eala sits in quarter 3, the same section as Iga Swiatek and a returning Serena Williams. The 2 women cannot meet before the final. If Eala wins her opener against Renata Zarazua, her round 2 opponent could be Serena Williams herself. This is the runway. Sabalenka isn't losing on the court. She's being outdrawn on the grounds, outstreamed on YouTube, and outmaneuvered in the scheduling office by a player she won't even face across the net unless they both reach the Saturday final. Zoom out further. Tennis has spent its entire modern era built around Europe and the Anglo-American axis. The Philippines is a country of 117 million people, with a diaspora the British government counts in the hundreds of thousands inside the UK alone, much of it embedded in the NHS workforce that's reportedly had this Wimbledon circled on the calendar since the draw came out. That's not a niche fan base. That's a market the WTA has never had to account for before. Watch what happens next. Wimbledon round 1 against Zarazua, a possible round 2 against Serena Williams, then the US Open swing, then the 2027 Australian Open, where you can bet Melbourne Park won't be putting her on court 6 again. None of this is a fairy tale, and Eala has never pretended otherwise. Back in January, in front of those same Melbourne crowds, she lost her Australian Open first-rounder to Alicia Parks after winning the opening set 6-0. She exited early at Roland Garros. She exited early at Bad Homburg just last week. Asked about that Bad Homburg loss by ABS-CBN on June 26th, she didn't blame the surface, the schedule, or the attention. She simply said the conditions were tough for her that day, and that she did the best she could with what she had. 5 days later, she was lifting the Birmingham trophy. 9,000 views turned into a bottleneck outside Court 6. A trophy speech delivered in Tagalog. A top 2 player eliminated in Berlin. The first-seeded Filipino in Grand Slam history. A world number 1 walking into Wimbledon defending a headline in a national newspaper, and a number 29 seed walking in defending nothing at all, just carrying an entire nation's hopes. Elina Svitolina is the best women's tennis player on earth. Alex Eala is the loudest. And at this Wimbledon, on a draw sheet that keeps them apart until the final Saturday, loudest is the one variable nobody on tour has figured out how to solve. Here's the question worth fighting about in the comments. Does Alex Eala make the second week at SW19? And if she does, who becomes the bigger story by the final weekend? The world number 1 defending her ranking, or the number 29 seed with a country marching behind her? If you've been in this corner since the Miami semifinal, since the Junior US Open, since before the seeding committee knew how to spell her name, this channel was built for you. We're the room where the people who saw it first talk it through, match by match, all the way through Wimbledon and into the US Open swing. Subscribe and stand with the rest of the Filipino army that's been right about this story from the start. Tennis Unfiltered.